Now, there are certain points during a wrestler's career when they lose their fan base. The reasons for the fans turning on this specific wrestler vary. The wrestler in question could have become stale, or the creative direction that WWE have taken the wrestler's character isn't in line with what fans want and they audibly turn on the wrestler. Most wrestlers, at least two are on the top of their game, are able to eventually turn this reaction around and win the fans back. This takes time. But which times were they? Well, join us now as Wrestlelamia looks at 10 exact moments fans turned on a WWE wrestler. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for daily wrestling videos, and follow us on Facebook for exclusive lists. Also check out Wrestlelamia.co.uk and our wrestling channel, Incredible. Number 10. Batista at the 2014 Royal Rumble. And when Batista returned to WWE in 2014, they had big plans for the former champion. They were going to have Batista win the Royal Rumble and headline WrestleMania 30 against Randy Orton. The issue here was at the time of Batista's grand return, Daniel Bryan's popularity skyrocketed. Bryan was the most popular star on the roster, and he was even more popular than John Cena. And there was no way that WWE fans were going to accept anyone other than Bryan as the face of the company. When the Rumble match came around, virtually everyone in the match, including Batista, was booed. This completely killed Batista's return, and the fans loathed the idea of Batista as a babyface. WWE were forced to turn Batista heel, and the creative plans for WrestleMania 30 were drastically altered. Number 9. Rey Mysterio at the 2014 Rumble. Speaking of the 2014 Rumble, due to the horrendous booking of the match, it resulted in fans turning on Rey Mysterio for the first time in company history. This came as somewhat of a surprise, as Mysterio is widely regarded as one of the most popular stars of all time, and it seemed impossible for fans to ever turn on him. Mysterio entered the match at number 30, and fans were fully expecting it to be Daniel Bryan. But when it wasn't Bryan, Mysterio received the most negative response of his career. Bryan would later admit how awful he felt that Mysterio received such a poor reaction, and he hoped that fans wouldn't maintain this negativity towards him long term, and thankfully they didn't. Number 8. Bayley on Raw. Initial plans for SummerSlam in 2017 called for Bayley to face Alexa Bliss for the Raw Women's title. Sadly, an injury to Bayley stopped these plans. On the August 7, 2017 edition of Raw, Bayley would come down to the ring to address her injury, and this was when the crowd fully turned on her. And nobody saw this coming, as Bayley was the default top babyface on the show, but something happened seemingly overnight with the perception of Bayley, and fans fell out of favour with the Bayley character. Bayley would be heavily heckled throughout a promo, and it was clear that Bayley was insanely uncomfortable. Although WWE wouldn't tweak her presentation and character until 2 years later, it was clear at this point that fans were already tired of Bayley as a top babyface, and something needed a change in the long term. Number 7. Goldberg and Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania 20. Heading into WrestleMania 20, fans had high expectations for Goldberg vs Brock Lesnar. The build toward their showdown was executed to perfection, and the inclusion of Stone Cold Steve Austin as a special guest referee seemed to elevate their rivalry. But when the match took place, the crowd turned on both Goldberg and Lesnar, and the reason for this was that it leaked online that both men planned to leave WWE. Fans felt betrayed, and they were going to let both men know that they had no interest in seeing them perform. This infamous match damaged the reputation of both men for a number of years, but luckily both of their second runs in WWE managed to rebuild their relationship with the core WWE fanbase. Number 6. Dean Ambrose at Backlash. Dean Ambrose successfully cashed in his Money in the Bank briefcase on Seth Rollins in 2016 to win the title. Ambrose's WWE title run came at a time when WWE were about to introduce the modern brand split, and his run was rather unmemorable as a whole. Ambrose would defend the title successfully on 2 pay-per-views before losing the title to AJ Styles at the Backlash pay-per-view. At this time, AJ had just defeated John Cena at SummerSlam, and his popularity had gone to the next level. Fans were ready for AJ to be the new face of the SmackDown brand, and this unfortunately led to Ambrose being pushed aside. Ambrose's popularity never truly recovered, and he would predominantly spend the rest of his time in WWE competing for the IC title. Number 5. Ronda Rousey at Survivor Series. The original plan for the Survivor Series in 2018 was to see Becky Lynch face Ronda Rousey. However, when Lynch suffered a legitimate injury, she would be replaced by Charlotte Flair. Going into the match, Flair was the default heel, while Rousey was one of the top babyfaces in the company. For whatever reason, during the match, the crowd suddenly decided to completely turn on Rousey. When Charlotte began to annihilate Rousey with a kendo stick, the crowd cheered and would even chant, "You deserve it." Rousey looked completely stunned by the crowd reaction, and it was clear that she never saw it coming. Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer offered some insight into Ronda's mindset following the crowd turning on her and stated, "Ronda looked furious leaving as far as with the crowd. She took a horrible beating and then they just turned on her something fierce, which is the opposite of what everything was done for. She didn't look happy about that at all." WWE began to tweet Rousey's character shortly after the pay-per-view, and before fans knew it, Rousey was a heel heading into WrestleMania 35. Number 4, The Rock at WrestleMania 18. Our two icons collided at WrestleMania 18 as The Rock went one-on-one with Hulk Hogan. It was expected that both men may be cheered in the match, but it was anticipated that the crowd would heavily favor The Rock. After all, Hogan was the villainous heel who tried to legitimately murder The Rock a few weeks prior on Raw. However, when the match began, it was clear that this was a pro-Hogan crowd. Hogan turned into a babyface in the match and The Rock would end up getting heavily booed. The crowd had officially turned on the Great One, but the Great One managed to turn it around. In 2003, The Rock would turn into Hollywood Rock. This was his heel persona, and the justification for his new persona was that the crowd turned on him at WrestleMania that year prior. The character was acclaimed by many and is widely regarded as some of the best work of his entire career. Number 3, Charlotte Flair. Now, it's hard to pinpoint exactly when fans turned on Charlotte Flair. Some say it was when she continuously defeated Sasha Banks on pay-per-view in 2016, or some may state that it was when she ended the undefeated streak of Asuka. However, the time that fans officially turned against Flair long-term was when she is inserted into the WrestleMania 35 main event on the 11th February 2019 edition of Raw. Flair had no business in the match, as Becky Lynch vs Ronda Rousey was a dream match, and they didn't need to add anyone to it. The segment, which involved Flair getting announced for WrestleMania 35, is currently the most disliked video on WWE's YouTube channel, so it's clear that this is the exact point in time that fans had officially had enough of the multi-time women's champion. Number 2, Seth Rollins at Hell in a Cell. Seth Rollins was on top of the world at WrestleMania 35. He had just defeated Brock Lesnar to win the Universal title, and it was clear that WWE fans had chosen him as the guy. But this fell apart when Rollins entered into a feud with The Fiend Bray Wyatt. WWE abruptly booked a match between the two at the Hell in a Cell pay-per-view in 2019, and it's become one of the most infamous matches in WWE history. The match ended in a no contest after Rollins' actions in the match were deemed too violent for a Hell in a Cell match. The crowd hated this match finish, and unfortunately for Rollins, he received the majority of the hate. The crowd completely turned on him, and this ultimately forced WWE to change his character and abandon plans to keep Rollins as one of the top babyfaces on the roster. And number 1, Roman Reigns at the Royal Rumble. About the time the 2015 Royal Rumble came around, WWE was certain they wanted Roman Reigns as a top new star in the entire company. The Rumble was going to act as Reigns' ascension to the main event, but it was a complete disaster. WWE booked the match so terribly that WWE fans actively and audibly turned against Reigns, and this damaged the relationship between fans and Reigns for a number of years. The issue with the match was how it was presented, as popular babyfaces such as Daniel Bryan and Dean Ambrose weren't presented as serious contenders, and it was made even worse by the dominant booking of Kane and Big Show, who were way past their prime. When Reigns eventually won, the sustained boos were insane, and even The Rock, who made a guest appearance at the final moments of the match, looked stunned by the crowd's response. This reaction was the catalyst for fans to become full anti-Reigns for the next few years, and this pretty much continued until his heel turn 5 years later. But there you have it, folks, 10 exact moments fans turned on a WWE wrestler. Be sure to leave your comments down below, and I'll see you next time with some more wrestling content.